My name is Vivian, and for the past 68 years, I've prided myself on my quiet nature. I've always believed that the loudest person in the room is often the one with the least to say. I moved through the world with a soft tread, an observer, someone who paid attention to the details others missed. It was a disposition that served me well, both in my personal life and, as it turns out, in a professional capacity few people could ever imagine. But on a Tuesday afternoon, under the unforgiving glare of an Italian sun, my quiet world was shattered by the blast of a ship's horn, a deafening pronouncement of my own invisibility. I was standing on the pier in Civitavecchia, the port that serves Rome, watching the majesty of the seas glide away from its moorings with the inexorable silent power of a planet leaving its orbit. Its white hull, vast and indifferent, grew smaller and smaller, a floating city of light and music sailing toward the horizon without me. On board were my daughter, Amelia, her husband, Chad, and my two grandchildren, Brayden and Sophie, my family, and they were leaving me behind. The cruise had been my idea, my treat. A grand 10-day Mediterranean voyage on one of the world's most luxurious cruise lines. I'd paid for it all, the adjoining suites with their private balconies, the shore excursion package, the premium drink service that Chad had insisted was an absolute necessity. I did it because I was trying to buy back time, to piece together the fragments of a family that felt increasingly distant. Ever since my husband, Robert, had passed away 5 years ago, a chasm had been slowly opening between myself and my daughter, a chasm that was meticulously engineered and expanded by her husband. Chad was a man carved from ambition and polished with insecurity. He was a mid-level manager at a soulless tech firm, but he carried himself like a Fortune 500 CEO. He spoke in acronyms and business jargon, evaluating every person he met for their potential synergy or network value. He saw me, his widowed mother-in-law, as a relic, a kindly, simple old woman with a bit of money from her late husband's prudent investments, a useful resource to be tapped, but not a person to be respected. He called me Viv, a casual abbreviation I'd always despised. It was a small thing, a tiny erosion of identity, but it was part of his pattern. To him, I was an asset with diminishing returns. The trip was meant to fix that. A shared experience, a memory to build. I'd pictured us laughing over gelato in Naples, marveling at the art in Florence, the kids' faces bright with wonder. But from the moment we boarded, Chad had set the tone. He was the self-appointed cruise director, an officious whirlwind of activity. He'd booked dinners, scheduled activities, and herded us from one optimal experience to the next. His voice always a little too loud, his gestures a little too grand. Amelia seemed perpetually flustered, trying to manage his expectations while keeping the children from dissolving into overtired meltdowns. That morning, in Rome, had been the worst. Chad had insisted on a punishing multi-site tour, the Colosseum, the Forum, Vatican City, all before our 3 p.m. all-aboard time. It was a forced march of photo opportunities. I'd felt a bit dizzy in the heat of St. Peter's Square, and had asked to sit for a moment. Chad had looked at his watch, a flicker of raw annoyance crossing his face before being replaced by a mask of saccharine concern. He told Amelia to take the kids for a bathroom break while he got me some water. He'd guided me to a bench, and in the shuffle of bags and cameras, he'd taken my small purse. "I'll hold this for you, Viv, just so you don't have to worry about it." I remember the feel of the cool leather strap leaving my shoulder. Inside that purse was my passport, my credit cards, my emergency cash, my lifeline. We made it back to the port with minutes to spare, a frantic rush through security. Chad was carrying the kids' backpacks, his own camera bag, and Amelia's tote. He was shouting instructions, pushing us forward. "Come on, people, move it. They won't wait for us." In the chaos, I didn't think to ask for my purse back. It was a detail, a small thing, and I trusted him. That was my mistake. Family is supposed to mean something. It's supposed to be the one place you don't have to keep your guard up. I was the last one in our group to scan my cruise card at the gangway, but it beeped red. An error message flashed on the screen. The security officer, a kind-faced woman with a weary expression, looked at it, then at me. "Ma'am, it seems your bag didn't get scanned on the way out this morning. We just need to see your passport to verify." I turned to Chad. "Chad, my purse, the one you were holding?" He stopped, his face a perfect blank. He patted his pockets, looked at the bags he was carrying. Your purse? I gave it back to you at the fountain. Amelia's eyes widened. No, you didn't. You said you'd put it in your camera bag. Did I? Chad opened his bag, rummaging through it with a theatrical show of confusion. No, honey. I definitely gave it back. Viv, are you sure you didn't put it down somewhere? The ship's horn blew then. The first, deep, resonant blast. A warning. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through me. No, Chad, you had it. I know you did. The security officer was speaking into her radio. The queue behind us was gone. We were the last ones. Another officer, this one more severe, came over. If you do not have your passport, you cannot board. It is maritime law. It's in my purse. I insisted, my voice rising with a tremor I couldn't control. My son-in-law had it. Chad held up his hands, a gesture of helpless innocence. I'm telling you I don't have it. She must have misplaced it. He looked at the ship, then at the officer. My wife and kids have to board. I'll stay and help her look for it. But Amelia, already hustling the tired children up the gangway, called back, her voice tight with stress. Chad, just come on. We'll sort it out from the ship. Mom, just find it, and we'll figure something out at the next port. And then he turned and walked away. He walked up that gangway without a backward glance. He scanned his card. It beeped green, and he was gone. He left me on a concrete pier in a foreign country with no passport, no money, and no phone, because my phone was in my purse. He left me there as if I were a piece of luggage he'd decided was too heavy to carry. I stood there, frozen, as they pulled the gangway away. I watched the thick hawsers being cast off, splashing into the murky water. I saw the sliver of water between the pier and the hull widen, becoming a river, then a gulf. And then came the final, soul-shaking blast of the horn, the one that says goodbye. They were gone. They had sailed away, assuming I was helpless, a confused old woman who had simply gotten lost. They were so focused on their own perfect, curated vacation that they hadn't just forgotten me, they had discarded me. And in their monumental arrogance, they never once considered who I really was. They saw Vivian, the quiet widow. They never saw the woman who for the last 15 years had been dining at captains' tables across the globe. The woman whose quiet observations and meticulously detailed reviews, published under the anonymous byline, The Mariner's Palate, could make or break a billion-dollar cruise line. They had no idea that their family-friendly cruise was about to get a review that would detail, in excruciating clarity, exactly how this company and its crew handled a passenger deliberately abandoned by her family. My family. The company's stock price was about to learn the real cost of poor customer service, and my son-in-law was about to learn the real cost of underestimating a quiet old woman. For a long time, I just stood there on the pier, the salty wind whipping strands of gray hair across my face. The sheer scale of the betrayal was a physical thing, a crushing weight that settled in my chest and made it hard to breathe. The majesty of the seas was now just a white speck against the vast, indifferent blue of the Tyrrhenian Sea. My family was on that speck. My entire world, or what I had thought was my world, was sailing away. The initial shock gave way to a wave of pure, unadulterated panic. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My hands started to shake, a tremor that began in my fingertips and radiated up my arms. I was 68 years old. I was alone in a country where I didn't speak the language fluently. I had no identification, no money, not a single euro, not a credit card. The clothes on my back were all I possessed. Chad hadn't just left me. He had stripped me of my identity and my agency with one casual, cruel act of forgetfulness. I stumbled over to a concrete bollard and sank down, my legs giving way. The rough surface scraped against my trousers. I could feel the stares of the few remaining port workers, their curiosity mixed with pity. An old woman, crying on a dock. It was a pathetic cliché, and I was living it. My mind raced, a chaotic slideshow of worst-case scenarios. I'd be arrested for vagrancy. I'd have to find the American embassy in Rome, somehow, and beg for help. I pictured myself sleeping on a park bench, a headline in a local paper. Anziana turista, Americana, abandonada, abandoned elderly American tourist. The humiliation of it was a physical nausea. This was what Chad wanted, I realized. He wanted me to be helpless. He wanted me to be a problem that Amelia would eventually have to solve, a messy, expensive, and stressful problem that would prove his long-held point that I was a burden. He had been planting this seed for years, watering it with casual insults and dismissive gestures. It was a slow, insidious campaign to isolate me from my own daughter. A memory surfaced, sharp and painful. It was from about a year after Robert died. I was having dinner at their house, a sterile, minimalist place that always felt more like a showroom than a home. I'd been talking about a trip I'd just taken, a solo journey through the Norwegian fjords. I was describing the stark beauty of the landscape, the silence of the water. Chad had been scrolling through his phone, barely listening. Finally, he'd looked up, a smirk playing on his lips. "Sounds nice, Viv. A bit lonely, though, isn't it? All these little hobbies of yours. You should really think about moving into a managed care community. They have organized activities. You could play bingo," he said, hobbies, with such disdain, as if my life's passion, my secret and incredibly successful career, was nothing more than a way for a lonely old woman to pass the time. Amelia had just nervously refilled my wine glass, her silent plea for me to let it go hanging in the air. And I had. For her sake, I had always let it go. It was a promise I'd made to Robert, not in words, but in the quiet understanding that had defined our 45 years of marriage. On his deathbed, his hand frail in mine, he'd looked at me, his eyes clouded with morphine, but still sharp with a lifetime of love and worry. "Amelia chose him," he'd whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "She has to walk her own path. Just be there for her, Viv. Don't let him push you away." So I hadn't. I had endured the slights, the condescension, the casual cruelty. I had paid for their down payment on that soulless house. I had funded the grandchildren's private school education. I had poured my resources into their lives, hoping to shore up the foundations of my daughter's happiness, hoping that one day she would see Chad for what he was. I had mistaken my financial support for an emotional connection, and now I was paying the price. It was a classic, foolish mistake. It was never about the money, I told myself, but that was a lie I used to fall asleep at night. In a way, it had always been about the money. For Chad at least. Another memory, this one more recent. The phone call about the cruise. I had called Amelia to check in, and I could hear the tension in her voice, stretched thin and tight like a wire. In the background, I heard Chad's booming voice, complaining about a deal that had fallen through, about the injustice of his bonus being smaller than he expected. Then Amelia had lowered her voice to a whisper. "Things are just a little tight right now, Mom." It was an old song, one I knew by heart. And I, in my desperate need to be the hero, to be seen as valuable, had offered up the perfect solution. What if I took us all on a cruise, a real 5-star trip, my treat? We could all use a break, reconnect. There was a pause, and then I heard her muffled voice speaking to Chad. I heard his response, clear as a bell. "Well, if she's paying, make sure it's the top-tier line. No point in slumming it." Even then, I'd ignored the klaxon bells of warning. I'd booked the trip, convincing myself it was an act of love. Now sitting on this cold, grimy bollard, I saw it for what it was, an investment in my own destruction. They weren't a family to be reconnected, they were pirates, and I had just willingly handed over my ship and its entire treasury. The despair was a thick fog, suffocating me. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, hot and shameful, and then another. I wrapped my arms around myself, a useless gesture of self-comfort, and as I sat there, a husk of a woman on a desolate pier, I saw it. Across the sprawling industrial port, mounted high on a sterile office building, was a logo I knew better than my own reflection. The stylized golden trident of the Majesty Cruise Line Corporation. Seeing it was like a bucket of ice water to the face. The fog of panic began to recede, burned away by a sudden, white-hot surge of anger. Not just anger, it was rage. A cold, crystalline rage that clarified everything. I wasn't just Vivian Sinclair, abandoned mother-in-law. I was the mariner's palate. I was the woman who had single-handedly caused the CEO of their biggest rival to resign after my review of their inaugural ship, the Oceanic Splendor. I was the woman whose opinion was sought by shipbuilders, and whose anonymity was a legend in the industry. They thought I was a helpless old woman. They had forgotten who I was, and in that moment, I decided I would remind them. The tears stopped, the shaking ceased. I got to my feet, my back straight, my chin up. The pitying looks from the port workers now felt like an irrelevant distraction. I looked down at my coat, a simple but elegant trench coat I always traveled with. My fingers fumbled for a moment along the inner seam of the silk lining, searching for a small, almost imperceptible thickness. There. My emergency device. It wasn't about revenge, until it was. In that exact moment, on that lonely pier, it became about nothing else. My resolve hardened from a liquid hope into something solid and sharp. I was no longer a victim. I was a predator that had just been poked with a very, very sharp stick. My fingers, now steady and sure, worked at the seam. It was a secret I had guarded for over a decade, a contingency plan for a disaster I never truly believed would happen. Tucked into a hidden pocket, shielded by layers of fabric, was a small, wafer-thin satellite phone, no bigger than a stack of credit cards. It was an encrypted, untraceable device, a direct line to the very few people in the world who knew my true identity. My late husband, Robert, a man who had worked in diplomatic security, had insisted on it. "Viv," he'd said, "your voice is your power. But in this world, power attracts predators. You need an insurance policy." He was, as always, right. I walked away from the main pier, seeking the relative privacy of a stack of shipping containers, stenciled with faded logos from around the world. The air smelled of diesel fumes and salt. I shielded the small device with my body, my back to the Port Authority building, and powered it on. The screen flickered to life, a simple text-based interface. There were only 3 contacts in its memory: lawyer, bank, and director. I pressed director. The phone rang only once before a crisp, familiar voice answered. It wasn't the CEO of Majesty Cruise Line. That would be too crude, too direct. My contact was a man named Arthur Vance, the Senior Vice President of Global Operations, a man whose entire career was built on making problems disappear before they could ever reach the CEO's desk. Arthur and I had a long, complicated history. We'd never met in person, but we had spoken on these encrypted lines half a dozen times over the years, usually when I was giving him a discreet heads-up about a critical flaw I'd discovered in one of his ships before I published my review. It was a professional courtesy I extended to those I respected, a chance for them to fix the problem. Arthur understood my value, and he understood my power. "Pallet," he answered, his voice calm and professional, betraying no surprise. He never used my real name on this line. "Arthur," I said, my own voice low and steady, belying the storm still raging inside me. "I have a situation." "Where are you?" "On a pier in Civitavecchia. Your ship, the Majesty of the Seas, just sailed without me." There was a moment of absolute silence on the line. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the calculations being made. This was not a simple case of a passenger missing the boat. This was his worst nightmare. "Explain," he said, his voice now tight with immense pressure. I gave him the unvarnished, factual account, the family trip I had paid for, the social climbing son-in-law, the misplaced purse containing my passport and all forms of payment, the crew's adherence to maritime law, preventing me from boarding, the casual, deliberate abandonment. I left out the emotion, delivering the facts with the cold precision of a legal deposition. When I finished, there was another pause. "The son-in-law's name?" Arthur asked. "Chad Miller. He's in Suite 7014, traveling with my daughter, Amelia Miller, and their 2 children." "Understood," Arthur said. The word was clipped, lethal. "Stay where you are. A car will be with you in 15 minutes. The driver will know your name. He will take you to the Hotel de Russi in Rome. A suite is being booked for you now. The bill will be handled. The local port agent for Majesty will meet you there with a representative from the U.S. Embassy. We will handle the passport situation. This will be expedited at the highest level. Do not speak to anyone else." "Am I clear?" "Crystal, Arthur," I replied. "Vivian," he said, using my real name for the first time in years, a sign of the gravity of the situation. "On behalf of the Majesty Corporation, I am profoundly sorry. This is an unacceptable failure at every level. We will make it right." "Oh, I know you will, Arthur," I said. a hint of steel in my tone. The question is how. I ended the call. I slipped the satellite phone back into its hidden pocket and smoothed the lining of my coat. A sleek black Mercedes pulled up to the curb less than 10 minutes later. A man in a dark suit got out, opened the rear door, and said, "Mrs. Sinclair, I am here for you." I nodded, slid into the cool leather interior, and didn't look back at the port. The first phase of my despair was over. The second phase, my resurrection, was just beginning. The Hotel de Russie was an oasis of opulent tranquility in the heart of Rome. I was checked in without a single question, escorted directly to a magnificent suite overlooking a terraced garden. Waiting for me as promised were two men. One was Marco, the local Majesty port agent, a man whose face was pale with anxiety. The other was a stern-looking man from the embassy. Within 2 hours, using digital records Majesty had on file from my previous cruises and a series of frantic high-level calls, my identity was confirmed. A temporary passport was being issued on an emergency basis, to be delivered by diplomatic courier the next morning. Marco, the port agent, looked as if he was about to have a heart attack. He kept apologizing, wringing his hands. "Signora Pallet," he whispered, using my codename with terrified reverence. "Anything you need, anything at all, just tell me." "I need to speak with the hotel director on the Majesty of the Seas," I said, "on a secure line. Now." Marco scrambled to comply. A few minutes later he handed me a satellite phone, his hand trembling slightly. A man with a warm Italian-accented voice answered. "This is Stefano Rossi." Stefano was the best hotel director in the Majesty fleet. I knew his work. He ran his ships with a perfect blend of efficiency and grace. We had spoken once before, years ago, when I was reviewing another of his ships. He didn't know my face, but he knew my name and my reputation. "Stefano, this is Vivian Sinclair," I said. "I believe you know me by another name." The intake of breath on the other end of the line was audible. "Signora Pallet, my God. Marco just informed me of the situation. I have no words. This is a disgrace." "Yes, it is," I said calmly. "Stefano, you are now my eyes and ears on that ship. I need you to be my ally in this. Can I count on your absolute discretion?" "Without question, Signora," he said, his voice resonating with sincerity, and I suspected, a healthy dose of professional self-preservation. "What do you need?" "First, I need to know when my family reported me missing." There was a rustle of papers. "I have the log right here," he said, his voice grim. "The ship sailed at 3:30 p.m. local time. The first inquiry from Mr. Miller at the guest services desk regarding your whereabouts was logged at 6:47 p.m. Over 3 hours later. 3 hours. They had been on the ship for over 3 hours before they even bothered to check if the woman who paid for their entire vacation was okay. The coldness of it was breathtaking. "And what was the nature of his inquiry?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "He was casual," Stefano said, choosing his words carefully. "He told my staff that you had likely wandered off and that you were very independent. He suggested you would probably make your own way to Naples for the next port of call, and that they shouldn't worry. So that was the story. I wasn't a missing person. I was a flighty old woman on an adventure. Chad hadn't just abandoned me. He had preemptively crafted a narrative to absolve himself of all responsibility. It was brilliant in its cruelty." "I see," I said. "Thank you, Stefano. That is very clarifying. Now for the plan. I will be reboarding your ship tomorrow in Naples. This is not to be logged in the public manifest. As far as the general crew and all other passengers are concerned, I was never gone. You will arrange for a private launch to bring me from the dock to a secondary gangway, away from the main passenger flow. Of course, Signora, my current suite, 7012, is to be sealed. Tell my family there was a plumbing emergency, a burst pipe, something catastrophic. All of my belongings are to be moved to the presidential suite. From this moment on, that is my residence." I could hear the smile in Stefano's voice. "It will be my absolute pleasure to personally oversee the relocation, Signora. My family in Suite 7014 is to be told nothing other than that my accommodations have been changed due to the maintenance issue. They are not to be given my new suite number. If they ask, you are to inform them that I have requested complete privacy. Under no circumstances are they to be allowed to contact me directly. Consider it done. Finally, Stefano, my son-in-law's onboard account, I am the guarantor for it. I want you to sever that link immediately." From now on, any purchases he or my daughter make must be secured with their own credit card. The well is dry. This time Stefano actually chuckled, a low, appreciative sound. Signora, this is the easiest instruction I have ever received. I will handle it personally right now. Good, I said. I will see you tomorrow, Stefano, and please call me Vivian. I spent the rest of the night in quiet contemplation. I ordered room service, a simple pasta with a light tomato sauce, and a glass of crisp Pinot Grigio. I ate slowly, deliberately, savoring each bite. I was no longer just reviewing a cruise line. I was conducting a forensic analysis of my own family. The review I was going to write would be a masterpiece. It would be a story of betrayal and corporate negligence, of personal heartbreak and professional redemption. It would be read by millions. It would be quoted in financial papers, and it would burn Chad's world to the ground. He wanted me to be invisible, a ghost. Fine, a ghost I would be, but I would be the most powerful, vengeful ghost he could ever imagine. The rendezvous in Naples was executed with military precision. As the Majesty of the Seas docked, a private car, arranged by Stefano, whisked me from my hotel to a quiet, restricted area of the port. A small, sleek launch was waiting. As we sped across the bay towards the colossal white ship, I felt a sense of ownership I had never felt before. This was my stage now, my arena. Stefano met me himself at the service gangway, his face a mask of professional concern and private sympathy. With him was the ship's captain, a tall, silver-haired Norwegian man named Captain Eriksson. His face was grim. "Mrs. Sinclair," the captain said, his voice a low baritone. "On behalf of my entire crew, I wish to extend my deepest, most sincere apologies. What happened in Civitavecchia is the single greatest failure of customer care I have witnessed in my 30 years at sea. There is no excuse." "Thank you, Captain," I said, meeting his gaze. "The failure was not with your crew, it was with my family. Your crew was merely a tool in their negligence. However, how the Majesty Line rectifies this situation is what I and my readers will be watching." His jaw tightened. "Understood. Your word is my command. Stefano has briefed me on your requirements. Your new suite is ready. Your privacy will be absolute." They escorted me through quiet service corridors, up a private staff elevator, and directly to the sprawling presidential suite on the top deck. It was magnificent, larger than my first apartment, with a sweeping private veranda, a baby grand piano, and its own dining area. My luggage was already there, neatly unpacked by a steward. "Your original table at the captain's dinner is confirmed for tonight, of course," Stefano said. "Your family was originally scheduled to join you. I have taken the liberty of reassigning them to a standard table in the main dining room, table 118. It has a lovely view of a lifeboat." A small, genuine smile touched my lips for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. "Excellent work, Stefano. You anticipate my needs perfectly. It is my job to serve the ship's most valued guests," he said, with a slight bow. "And make no mistake, Signora, you are the most valued guest we have ever had." As Stefano and the captain departed, leaving me in the silent, opulent suite, I received the first signal that the plan was in motion. A text message from Amelia. "Mom, thank God, we were so worried. They said there was a flood in your room. Are you okay? Where are you?" I looked at the message, a perfect encapsulation of their manufactured reality. I didn't reply. I let the silence be my answer. Later I received a frantic call from Chad. I let it go to voicemail. His message was a blustering, angry mess. "Viv, what the hell is going on? Guest services won't tell us anything. They said your room was flooded, but this is ridiculous. And they just declined my card at the bar. They said you cut off the account. You call me back right now. This is completely unacceptable. Unacceptable." He had the gall to use that word. He, who had left me destitute on a foreign dock, found it unacceptable that he could no longer charge $500 bottles of champagne to my account. The sheer breathtaking arrogance of it was almost beautiful in its purity. That evening I took my time getting ready. I chose a simple, elegant black gown and the pearl necklace Robert had given me on our 40th anniversary. I felt a strange sense of calm, the serene focus of a general before a decisive battle. When I entered the grand dining room, the maitre d' rushed to my side. Captain Eriksson rose from his table at the center of the room and came to greet me personally, escorting me to my seat on his right. The entire room watched, a sea of curious faces in formal wear, and across that sea, I saw them. Table 118, my family. Chad was staring, his mouth literally agape, a half-eaten bread roll frozen in his hand. His face, usually flushed with self-satisfaction, was a mottled canvas of shock, confusion, and dawning horror. Amelia looked like she'd seen a ghost. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and searching, fixed on me. Even the children, Braden and Sophie, were pointing, their faces alight with the simple, uncomplicated joy of seeing their grandmother. I met Amelia's gaze across the crowded room. I didn't smile, I didn't scowl. I simply gave her a small, almost imperceptible nod, a cool, quiet acknowledgement of her existence. Then I turned my full attention to Captain Erickson, who was already deep in a fascinating story about navigating a superstorm off the coast of Alaska. To the rest of the room, and especially to table 118, the message was unmistakable. I was not one of them. I was in the ship's inner sanctum, an honored guest of the highest command. They were just passengers. The silent takeover was complete. I had reboarded their world, but I was no longer a part of it. I was its judge, jury, and very soon, its executioner. The rest of the dinner was a master class in psychological warfare, waged with polite conversation and perfectly chilled wine. Every time I laughed at one of the captain's jokes, I could feel Chad's eyes burning into the side of my head. Every deferential gesture from a passing waiter, every time my water glass was refilled before it was even half empty, was a small, sharp jab at his inflated ego. He was a man who defined himself by perceived status, and he was being forced to watch as the woman he'd dismissed as an irrelevant old relic was treated like visiting royalty. He was stewing in a broth of his own insignificance, and it was a dish I intended to serve him cold, night after night. After the dessert course, Amelia made her move. I saw her stand, her napkin crumpled in her fist, her expression a mixture of desperation and resolve. She started to walk towards the captain's table. But before she had taken 3 steps, Stefano materialized at her side, as if summoned from the very air. He was a picture of suave, impenetrable politeness. He spoke to her in a low voice, his posture respectful but firm. I couldn't hear the words, but I could see the effect. Amelia's shoulders slumped. She argued for a moment, gesturing towards me, but Stefano simply shook his head with an air of final, regretful authority. Defeated, she returned to her table, sinking into her chair under Chad's furious, whispered interrogation. The message had been sent and received. You have no access here. This is not your world. Later, back in the palatial silence of my suite, I allowed myself a small, bitter smile. This was no longer just about a single act of betrayal. It was about dismantling the entire rotten structure Chad had built around my daughter. He had isolated her, convinced her that his ambition was her security, that his cruelty was just a form of strength. Amelia wasn't evil, she was a hostage, suffering from a profound case of Stockholm Syndrome, so conditioned to his manipulations that she couldn't see the bars of her own cage. My sudden, inexplicable elevation in status was the key to that cage, a confusing, undeniable fact that contradicted everything Chad had told her about me. The next day, as the ship sailed towards the shores of France, the cracks in their united front began to show. I took my breakfast on my private veranda, an exquisite spread of fresh fruit, pastries, and coffee, served by a personal steward. From my vantage point, I could see the public pool deck below. I watched as Chad paced back and forth along the edge of the water, jabbing at his phone, his face a thunderous mask. He was likely trying to call his credit card company, his bank, anyone who could explain why his financial world was suddenly crumbling. Amelia sat on a lounge chair, nominally watching the children splash in the pool, but her attention was elsewhere. She kept glancing up, not at my suite, but around the ship, as if seeing it for the first time. She was noticing the deference of the crew, the quiet efficiency, the layers of hierarchy she had never seen before. She was a smart woman, my Amelia. She had been a history major in college, fascinated by power structures and social dynamics. Now she was trapped inside one she didn't understand, and the historian in her was waking up. Chad's frustration finally boiled over. He stormed over to the bar, slapped his cruise card on the counter, and ordered a drink. I watched, a silent observer from my eagle's nest, as the bartender politely shook his head. Chad's voice rose, attracting stares. He was becoming a scene, a public spectacle of impotent rage. Finally, he threw his hands up in disgust, pulled a wallet from his pocket, and slapped down a credit card. It was a small defeat, but a deeply public one. He had been reduced to the level of a common tourist, forced to pay his own way. For a man like Chad, this was a fate worse than death. This was the opening I needed. I called Stefano. Stefano, a small favor. I would like to send a gift to my grandchildren. Perhaps a voucher for the ice cream parlor and the video arcade. Could you have a steward deliver it to my daughter personally? With a simple note, of course, Vivian. What should the note say? It should say, for Braden and Sophie, with all my love, Grandma. P.S. Amelia, I will be on my veranda at 4 p.m. this afternoon if you would like to have a cup of tea. Please come alone. It was a direct invitation, a bypassing of the gatekeeper. It put the choice squarely in Amelia's hands. She could obey her furious, controlling husband, or she could defy him and speak to her mother. It was a test. At precisely 4 p.m., there was a soft knock on the door to my suite. It was Amelia. She stood there alone, looking small and lost in the grand hallway. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her face etched with a confusion so deep it looked like pain. I led her out to the veranda, where a tea service was already waiting. For a long time, she just stared at the view, at the endless expanse of the sea. "Mom," she finally whispered, her voice cracking. "What is happening?" I poured her a cup of tea, my hands steady. I chose my words with surgical care. It was not the time for anger or accusation. It was the time for simple, undeniable facts. "What do you think is happening, Amelia?" "I don't know," she said, shaking her head. "One minute, we're on vacation. The next you're gone, and then you're back, but you're gay. This," she gestured vaguely at the opulent suite, at the deferential treatment, at the invisible wall between us. "Chad is going crazy. He says you're trying to punish him for losing your purse." "Did he lose it, Amelia?" I asked softly. "Or did he leave it?" She flinched as if I'd slapped her. "He said it was an accident. He told the ship's staff that I had wandered off and would find my own way to Naples," I stated, my voice level and devoid of emotion. "He didn't report me missing for over 3 hours. Those are the facts from the ship's official log. Does that sound like an accident to you?" The blood drained from her face. She saw it. For the first time, she saw the sheer, calculated malice of his actions, stripped bare of his excuses and manipulations. It was one thing to hear it from me. It was another to know it was documented, an official record of his indifference. "He was stressed," she stammered, a weak, reflexive defense of her captor. "The kids were tired. He was worried about the time." "Stop," I said, my voice still quiet, but now infused with a new hardness. "Stop making excuses for him. I have been watching you do it for 10 years. Every time he belittles you, every time he dismisses me, every time he treats his own children like accessories for his image, you smooth it over. You apologize for him. You absorb his cruelty and call it stress." Tears began to stream down her face, silent and hot. "I love him," she whispered, a statement that sounded more like a question. "Do you?" I asked. "Or are you afraid to be without him?" "There's a difference." Robert saw it. He saw the way Chad chipped away at you, piece by piece, until you forgot how bright you were supposed to shine. He made you small, Amelia, so he could feel big. The dam broke. Sobs racked her body, the painful, tearing sounds of a long-held illusion shattering. She finally understood. The family exodus wasn't from me, it was her own, a slow, painful crawl out of the prison he had built for her. Chad's desperate countermoves, the yelling, the complaining, the pathetic attempts to reassert his dominance, were not the actions of a man in control. They were the panicked flailings of a tyrant whose subjects were beginning to revolt. The power had shifted, not just on the ship, but in the foundation of my daughter's heart. The final confrontation happened sooner than I expected. My conversation with Amelia had been the catalyst. She had returned to her suite not as Chad's meek, apologetic wife, but as a woman whose eyes had been opened. I can only imagine the argument that ensued, the explosion of his fury when he realized his primary tool of control, her compliance, was broken. He must have seen my invitation for tea as the ultimate act of war, a direct incursion into his territory. and like any cornered animal, he lashed out, abandoning all pretense of strategy for a frontal assault. I was in the middle of writing my review, sitting at a large mahogany desk overlooking the sea, documenting every detail with cold literary precision. The title was already set, Abandoned at Sea, The True Cost of Majesty Cruise Line's Family Values. I was detailing the seamless efficiency of the emergency response from the corporate level, contrasting it sharply with the on-the-ground negligence enabled by a culture of passenger non-accountability. It was going to be devastating. Not a simple hatchet job, but a nuanced, powerful critique that would be impossible to dismiss. Suddenly, the door to my suite burst open. It hadn't been knocked on, it had been forced. Chad stood there, his face purple with rage, his expensive linen shirt rumpled. Amelia was behind him, her hand to her mouth, her eyes wide with fear and shame. I tried to stop him, she mouthed silently. Chad strode into the room, his chest puffed out, a caricature of masculine aggression. "All right, Viv, this little game of yours is over," he boomed, his voice echoing in the cavernous suite. "I don't know what kind of stunt you're pulling, getting the crew to kiss your feet, but this ends now. You will reinstate my account, you will move back to a normal room, and you will stop poisoning my wife against me." I didn't stand up. I didn't raise my voice. I simply swiveled in my chair to face him, my hands resting calmly on the desk. "Get out of my suite, Chad." "Your suite," he scoffed, laughing a humorless, ugly laugh. "You mean the suite I'm paying for with this ridiculous trip? You think you have power here? You're a lonely old woman playing princess for a day. I'm going to sue this entire cruise line for what they've done. For kidnapping you, for causing my family emotional distress. When my lawyers are done with them, they'll own this ship." It was such a pathetic, flailing display of impotent fury. He was a child throwing a tantrum, making threats he had no power to enforce. I almost felt a flicker of pity for him. Almost. I let him finish, let his tirade hang in the silent, air-conditioned room. Then I looked past him, to my daughter. "Amelia," I said, my voice calm and clear, "I asked you if you loved this man. I want you to look at him now. Look at this red-faced, screaming bully who forces his way into an old woman's room. Is this the man you want your son to become? Is this the model of a husband you want for your daughter?" Amelia stared at Chad, but it was like she was looking at a stranger. The man she had constructed in her mind, the ambitious, driven, successful husband, had vanished, replaced by the pathetic, screaming creature before her. The spell was well and truly broken. "It's over, Chad," she whispered, her voice finding a strength I hadn't heard in a decade. "What did you say?" he snarled, turning on her. "Don't you dare side with her against me." "I said, it's over," she repeated, louder this time. "I'm done." Just as Chad opened his mouth to unleash another torrent of abuse, a firm, polite knock sounded at the now open door. Stefano stood there, flanked by two formidable-looking security officers in crisp white uniforms. He didn't look at me. His gaze was fixed entirely on Chad. "Mr. Miller," Stefano said, his voice the epitome of professional calm. "I am the hotel director. We have had multiple complaints from other guests about a disturbance originating from this suite. Furthermore, you have forcibly entered the private suite of another passenger. Captain Erickson has reviewed your behavior over the past 48 hours and has made a decision." Chad's blustering faded, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. "A decision? What decision?" Stefano's expression remained impassive. "For the safety and comfort of our other guests and our crew, your family will be disembarking at our next port of call, which is Marseille, tomorrow morning at 8 a.m. One of our destination managers has already taken the liberty of booking 4 one-way flights for you from Marseille to your home airport. At your expense, of course. Our security team will escort you to your suite now to begin packing. You will be confined there until we dock." The color drained from Chad's face. He was speechless. He looked from Stefano to the guards, to me, his mind unable to process this total and complete reversal of fortune. He had been so certain of his power, of his status as the paying customer, the head of the family. He had no framework for a world in which he had no power at all. "You can't do this," he stammered, his voice a pathetic squeak. "We can," Stefano said simply. "And we have." He gestured, and the two security officers stepped forward, flanking Chad. "If you'll come with us, sir." Defeated, Chad allowed himself to be escorted out of the room. He didn't look back. Amelia remained, tears streaming down her face, but these were not tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of release. She looked at me, her expression raw and open. "Mom, I'm so sorry." "I know," I said softly. "Go pack your things, dear. It's time to go home, a new home." She nodded, turned, and walked out, leaving me alone in the magnificent silent suite. The new reality had set in. The charade was finally over. I turned back to my desk, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I had a conclusion to write. The remainder of the cruise passed in a state of serene tranquility. The ship felt lighter, the air cleaner. I spent my days reading on my veranda, enjoying quiet, solitary meals in the ship's finest specialty restaurants, and speaking with a clarity and honesty to the crew that I hadn't been able to before. They were no longer just subjects for my review. They were people, and I took the time to learn their names and their stories. In a strange way, by losing the family I thought I had, I found a different kind of connection. The morning we docked in Marseille, I stood on my veranda and watched them disembark. A single security guard escorted the four of them down the gangway to a waiting taxi. Chad stared straight ahead, his face a grim, stony mask of humiliation. The children looked confused, but Amelia, just before she ducked into the taxi, looked up. She scanned the ship's massive facade until she found my balcony. She raised a hand, not in a wave, but in a quiet, sad salute, a gesture of apology and farewell. I nodded back, a silent acknowledgement. A fragile bridge had been built across a vast canyon of pain. It was a start. 2 days later, as the majesty of the seas sailed its final leg back toward Barcelona, my review went live. It was published simultaneously on my private website, which got millions of unique visitors a month, and was syndicated to 3 major international travel publications. The headline, "Abandoned at Sea. The True Cost of Majesty Cruise Line's Family Values," was an earthquake. The story it told was not one of simple revenge. It was a detailed, compelling narrative. I praised the corporate leadership for their swift and decisive action once they were alerted. I praised Stefano and Captain Erickson by name, holding them up as paragons of service and integrity. But I excoriated the company's culture at the passenger level, a culture so focused on process and liability that it allowed a family to casually discard one of its own, with zero immediate follow-up. I detailed Chad's behavior, not just as a cruel son-in-law, but as a case study in the type of arrogant, entitled passenger that the cruise line's marketing seemed to attract. I posed a simple, devastating question at the end. Is this a family-friendly cruise line, or is it merely a floating resort that rents out rooms to people who happen to be related? The fallout was immediate and spectacular. By noon, Majesty Cruise Line's stock had dropped 9%. Financial news networks were running segments on the Mariner's palate and the incredible power of a single anonymous critic. The company's PR department went into meltdown. That afternoon, I received a personal call in my suite from Arthur Vance. He didn't sound angry. He sounded relieved. "Vivian," he said, "I've just come from a 4-hour emergency board meeting. I wanted you to hear it from me first. The head of guest experience for the entire fleet has been fired. The policies regarding missing passengers are being completely rewritten from the ground up, using your article as the blueprint. We're calling it the Sinclair Protocol." He paused. "You didn't just cost us $1 billion on paper today. You forced us to confront a cancer within our own company culture. You might have just saved us from ourselves, so thank you." A few weeks later, back in the quiet comfort of my own home, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. It was Amelia. She sounded different. Her voice was lighter, clearer. She told me she had left Chad for good. She and the kids were staying with her cousin in another state. She had filed for divorce. She had a job interview next week, at a local museum. She was starting over. "He's a mess, Mom," she said. "His company fired him after the story came out. Apparently they don't like their senior managers becoming international symbols of toxic behavior. He's blaming me. He's blaming you. He's blaming everyone but himself. That's what men like Chad do," I said. "I know that now," she replied. And in those 4 words I heard the return of the smart, strong daughter I had raised. Can we see you soon? The kids miss their grandma." "I'd like that very much," I said. a genuine warmth spreading through my chest. Looking back on it all now, it's easy to see it as a story of revenge. And don't get me wrong, there is a deep, satisfying pleasure in watching a man like Chad Miller be undone by his own arrogance. There's a certain karmic justice in it that's hard to deny. But it wasn't about revenge, not really. Not at its core. It was about respect. It was about being seen. For years, my family had looked at me and seen a utility, a bank account, a babysitter, a convenient, quiet fixture in their lives. They had stopped seeing the person. They forgot that quiet doesn't mean weak, that age doesn't mean helpless, and that a mother's love isn't a resource to be endlessly exploited without consequence. Chad thought he could leave me on that pier and simply sail away from his problems. But he learned that some problems follow you, some problems own a satellite phone, and some problems write reviews that can sink a stock price. Have you ever felt that way? Invisible to the very people who are supposed to see you most clearly. Have you ever had to find a way to remind them of your own value, your own strength? Let me know your story in the comments below. I read every single one, and if you enjoyed this story and want to hear more, please hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel. It means the world to me to know that my voice is being heard. Thank you for listening.